There is a particular kind of torment that visits those who have glimpsed what lies beneath the surface of ordinary life. And it is not the torment of ignorance, but of knowing. You wake in the morning and the world looks different, not because anything has changed in the external arrangement of things, but because something fundamental has shifted in how you perceive it all. The comfortable illusions that once wrapped around you like warm blankets have dissolved, and what remains is a raw, unfiltered vision of reality that you cannot unsee. You watch people around you moving through their days with apparent contentment, laughing at things that no longer seem funny, pursuing goals that now appear hollow, finding satisfaction in pleasures that taste like ash in your mouth. And you wonder, with a kind of desperate bewilderment, how they do it. How do they not see what you see? How do they sleep so peacefully when you lie awake at night, your mind turning over truths that refuse to grant you rest? This is not depression, though it may wear that mask. This is not cynicism, though others may accuse you of it. This is the condition of someone who has eaten from the tree of knowledge and discovered that paradise was built on blindness. You have seen through the games people play, the lies they tell themselves, the elaborate structures of meaning they construct to avoid facing the essential emptiness that lurks beneath their certainties. You have recognized the performance in what others call authenticity, the fear hiding behind what they call love, the desperation masked as ambition, and now you stand outside the circle of comfortable delusion, unable to rejoin it, unable to pretend you do not know what you know. The loneliness of this position is profound, not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being awake in a world of sleepers. And the question that haunts you is not whether you can go back, because you already know you cannot, but whether there is any path forward that does not lead to madness or despair. Dostoevsky understood this particular species of suffering better than perhaps any writer who has ever lived. He knew it not as an abstract philosophical problem, but as a lived experience, something that burned in his own chest during those long nights of exile and imprisonment, during the years when his own awakening to certain truths about human nature and existence left him isolated from the comfortable certainties of his contemporaries. In his notebooks and letters, in the tortured consciousness of his greatest characters, he mapped the territory you now inhabit, the space between innocence lost and wisdom not yet gained, between the death of illusion and the birth of something that might, if you can endure it, transform you into someone capable of bearing the weight of truth. What you are experiencing is not a breakdown, but a breaking open. You have not lost your mind. You have found it and discovered that consciousness at this level is a burden few are willing to carry. Dostoevsky called this the curse of lucidity, the penalty paid by those whose perception cuts too deep, who cannot help but see the mechanisms behind the theater, the void beneath the stage. His greatest characters were not criminals or saints, but individuals who had glimpsed fundamental truths about existence and found themselves unable to return to the sleep of ordinary consciousness. Raskolnikov discovered that moral laws were human constructions and that the extraordinary individual stood above them, only to find that this knowledge did not liberate, but tormented him. Ivan Karamazov reasoned his way to the conclusion that without God, everything is permitted, and this intellectual truth became a psychological prison from which he could not escape. The underground man saw through all the noble lies of civilization and found himself trapped in a consciousness so acute it paralyzed him. These were not failure stories, but initiation stories, accounts of souls passing through a necessary darkness on their way to a deeper understanding. Dostoevsky knew that truth does not announce itself gently. It arrives like a thief in the night, stealing away the comfortable furniture of your previous understanding and leaving you in an empty room with only the bare walls of reality. And in that emptiness, in that stripping away of illusion, something extraordinary becomes possible, but only if you do not turn away, only if you can resist the temptation to rebuild the comfortable lies or to numb yourself into forgetfulness. The first thing Dostoevsky would tell you is that your inability to return to innocence is not a curse, but a calling. You have been chosen, not by some external deity, but by the architecture of your own soul, to carry a particular kind of knowledge. The world needs people who cannot sleep through the performance, who cannot pretend that the emperor is clothed when he stands naked before them. But this calling comes with a terrible price, and the price is paid in loneliness, in alienation from the consensus reality that binds most people together in their shared blindness. You will be called negative for refusing to celebrate what you recognize as hollow. You will be called arrogant for not bowing before idols you can see are empty. You will be called depressed for not finding joy in the distractions that keep others entertained. And none of these accusations will be entirely wrong, because the truth you carry does make you different, does set you apart, does mark you as someone who no longer fits easily into the world as it is. But here is what Dostoevsky discovered through his own suffering and through the suffering of his characters. This alienation is not the end of the journey, but its beginning. The awakening you have experienced has destroyed your old life, yes, but it has also created space for a new one, a life built not on comfortable lies, but on hard-won authenticity. The question is not whether you can go back to sleep, because you cannot, but whether you can learn to live awake, whether you can transform the curse of lucidity into a gift of vision, whether you can find others who share your wakefulness and build with them something real in a world of shadows. In Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky wrote of Raskolnikov's suffering after his crime, but the crime itself was not the murder. It was the application of his new truth, his intellectual awakening to a world without absolute moral law. What tormented Raskolnikov was not guilt in the conventional sense, but the gap between his theory and his lived experience, between what he thought he should feel as one of the extraordinary people and what he actually felt as a human being, still bound by the very moral instincts he had tried to reason away. His salvation came not from returning to his previous innocence, which was impossible, but from moving through his suffering toward a deeper understanding, from the abstract truth of his intellect to the lived truth of his heart. Dostoevsky showed that awakening is not a single moment, but a process, and the middle stage of that process, where you currently find yourself, is characterized by disorientation, despair, and a terrible loneliness. You see the falseness in relationships that appear loving, but are built on mutual dependency and fear. You watch people chase success as if achievement could fill the void inside them, and you want to shake them awake. to tell them they are running in the wrong direction. You observe the elaborate social dances, the performance of emotions that are not truly felt, the endless negotiations of ego and image, and you feel like a visitor from another planet, someone who understands the language but cannot understand why anyone would speak it. This is not superiority, though it may be mistaken for it. This is the natural response of someone who has seen through one set of illusions and has not yet found a framework to replace them. You are standing in the ruins of your old understanding, and the new structure has not yet revealed its blueprint. Dostoevsky knew that this intermediate state, this liminal space between the death of innocence and the birth of wisdom, is the most dangerous time in a person's spiritual development. It is the time when you are most vulnerable to nihilism, to the seductive voice that whispers, if nothing means what you thought it meant, then nothing means anything at all. Ivan Karamazov stood at this precipice, reasoning his way to a universe without God, and therefore without meaning, without moral order, without any ground beneath his feet. His famous proclamation that if God does not exist, then everything is permitted was not a liberation but a horror, because he discovered that a universe of absolute freedom is also a universe of absolute isolation, where each person is trapped in their own subjective experience, with no bridge to any other consciousness, no shared reality, no possibility of genuine connection. But Dostoevsky also showed, through the character of Alyosha, that there is another way to respond to the same awakening. Alyosha saw the same truths as Ivan, understood the same arguments, glimpsed the same abyss, but he did not fall into it because he maintained a connection to something beyond the intellect, to a kind of knowing that comes not from reasoning, but from being, not from analysis, but from love. This is the crucial insight that Dostoevsky offers to those who find themselves unable to return to sleep. The awakening that destroys your old certainties is only the first half of the transformation. The second half, the half that most people never complete, is the discovery of a new kind of certainty, one that is not based on illusion, but on a direct encounter with what is real. You cannot go back to sleep, but you also cannot stay forever in this twilight state of knowing what is false without knowing what is true. The path forward requires something more difficult than either ignorance or knowledge. It requires what Dostoevsky called living faith, not faith in religious dogma necessarily, though for him it took that form, but faith in the possibility of meaning, even in a universe that does not hand you meaning prepackaged and guaranteed. It requires learning to bear the weight of consciousness without being crushed by it, to see clearly without becoming paralyzed by what you see, to understand the games people play without losing your capacity to engage with them as human beings rather than as objects of your superior awareness. The underground man in Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground represents the failure of this transformation. He sees through everything, understands all the mechanisms, recognizes all the self-deception, but this knowledge does not liberate him. Instead, it traps him in a hell of his own making, where his consciousness feeds on itself, where his acute awareness becomes a kind of disease that prevents him from acting, from connecting, from living. He is awake, yes, but his wakefulness has curdled into resentment, his clarity into bitterness, his truth into a weapon he uses to destroy any possibility of genuine relationship. He cannot return to the sleep of ordinary people, but he also cannot move forward into a wakeful life that has room for love, for beauty, for the irrational and unpredictable movements of the human heart. This is the danger you face now. The truth you have seen can become a prison if you allow it to cut you off entirely from the world of human connection and meaning making. Yes, most people are asleep. Yes, most relationships are built on unconscious patterns and mutual self-deception. Yes, most of what passes for meaning in conventional life is elaborate distraction from existential emptiness. But if you use these truths only to separate yourself, only to stand in judgment, only to confirm your isolation, then your awakening will have served only to make you more alone, more bitter, more trapped than you were before. The question is not whether the truth you see is true, because it is, but what you do with that truth, how you carry it, whether you allow it to make you more human or less. Dostoevsky believed that the awakening to truth must eventually lead to the awakening to compassion, or it remains incomplete and dangerous. When you see through the illusions that others live by, you can respond with contempt, seeing them as fools or cowards, or you can respond with tenderness, recognizing that their illusions are often protective mechanisms against suffering they do not yet have the strength to face. When you recognize the emptiness beneath conventional meanings, you can respond with nihilistic resignation, or you can respond with the creative task of building new meanings that are honest, that acknowledge the void, but refuse to worship it. When you feel the loneliness of your awakened state, you can respond with withdrawal into isolation, or you can respond with the search for others who share your wakefulness, who can meet you in the territory beyond comfortable lies. Prince Mishkin in The Idiot was Dostoevsky's attempt to imagine what a fully awakened consciousness might look like if it did not turn toward bitterness or despair, but toward love. Mishkin sees everything, understands the darkness in every soul he encounters, recognizes the cruelty and self-deception that drive human behavior. But his knowledge does not make him cruel or cynical. Instead, it makes him impossibly gentle, infinitely forgiving, incapable of judgment, even when judgment seems warranted. The world calls him an idiot because he will not play the games of ego and power, because he responds to truth with love rather than with strategic positioning. And the tragedy of the novel is that the world destroys him, that his goodness cannot survive contact with a reality built on lies and violence. But Dostoevsky was not saying that Mishkin's way is impossible, only that it is difficult, that it requires a kind of strength that looks like weakness, a kind of wisdom that appears as foolishness. You are standing at a crossroads, and the direction you choose now will determine whether your awakening becomes a curse or a blessing. One path leads deeper into isolation, into the cold comfort of knowing you are right and they are wrong, into the bitter satisfaction of seeing through everything and finding it all wanting. This path promises clarity, but delivers loneliness, promises truth, but delivers despair, promises freedom from illusion, but delivers imprisonment in your own superior consciousness. The other path, the one Dostoevsky mapped through suffering and faith, leads through the darkness toward a new kind of connection, not based on shared illusions, but on shared recognition of the human condition, not based on comfortable lies, but on the difficult truth that we are all struggling, all suffering, all trying to make sense of an existence that resists our attempts to contain it in neat categories. This second path does not mean pretending you do not see what you see. It does not mean returning to innocence or forcing yourself to believe what you know to be false. It means learning to hold your truth lightly enough that it does not cut you off from humanity. Learning to see clearly without losing your capacity for wonder. Learning to know the worst about human nature without losing your ability to recognize and honor the best. It means discovering that the loneliness you feel is not unique to you, but is the common inheritance of everyone who has ever woken up, and that in this recognition, there is a potential for connection deeper than anything available to those who remain asleep. Dostoevsky understood that the most profound relationships are not between those who share the same illusions, but between those who have faced the same truths and chosen to remain human anyway. When Raskolnikov finally confesses to Sonia in Crime and Punishment, he is not confessing to someone who does not understand darkness. He is confessing to someone who has lived in her own darkness, who knows what it is to see the worst of existence and to continue choosing love despite that knowledge. Their connection is not based on shared blindness, but on shared sight, on the recognition that they have both walked through hell and emerged still capable of tenderness, still capable of reaching toward something beyond the void. This is what becomes possible when you refuse to go back to sleep, but also refuse to let your wakefulness harden into cynicism. You begin to recognize others who carry the same burden of consciousness, who wear the same marks of having seen too much. They may not speak about it directly, because the language for these things is difficult, but you can sense it in the way they hold themselves, in the depth behind their eyes, in their refusal to engage with the shallow performances that satisfy others. When you meet such a person, there is a recognition that happens beneath words, a knowing that you are not alone, that your experience of awakening is not unique, but is part of a larger pattern, a pattern that has repeated throughout human history whenever someone has had the courage to look directly at what is real. These connections are rare, and you cannot force them, but they are worth waiting for because they offer something that no comfortable illusion ever could. Genuine meeting, authentic encounter, relationship built not on what you pretend to be, but on what you actually are. Dostoevsky believed that one real connection, one moment of true recognition, was worth more than a lifetime of pleasant, but ultimately empty social interactions. And he believed that such connections become possible only after you have passed through the fire of awakening, only after you have seen through the games and chosen to remain available for something deeper. But to remain available, to keep your heart open even when you see the darkness clearly, requires a particular kind of strength. It requires the strength to bear truth without being destroyed by it, to maintain hope without lapsing into naivety, to see clearly without losing your capacity for love. This is the strength that Dostoevsky spent his life trying to understand and trying to cultivate in himself and his readers. It is not the strength of willpower or self-discipline, though those have their place, but the strength of surrender, the strength to accept that you are both the one who knows and the one who does not know, both the awakened and the still awakening, both the clear-sighted observer and the stumbling participant in the human drama. The truth has shown you everything, or at least more than you knew before, and you cannot unknow it. But you can choose what you do with this knowledge. You can use it as a wall between yourself and others, or you can use it as a foundation for deeper connection. You can let it make you hard and bitter, or you can let it make you tender and wise. You can retreat into the fortress of your superior understanding, or you can venture out into the world with your eyes open but your heart still available. The path is not obvious, and there will be moments when the loneliness threatens to overwhelm you, when the weight of consciousness seems too much to bear, when you wonder whether sleep might not have been better than this wakeful suffering. But Dostoevsky promises you this: if you can endure, if you can resist the twin temptations of returning to illusion and hardening into cynicism, if you can hold your truth with an open hand rather than a clenched fist, then something remarkable becomes possible. You begin to discover a kind of freedom that those who remain asleep can never know. The freedom that comes not from avoiding truth, but from embracing it fully. Not from pretending the void does not exist, but from learning to dance at its edge. Not from finding easy answers, but from learning to live beautifully with difficult questions. Your awakening is not complete. It has only begun. The truth has shown you what is false, but it has not yet shown you what is real. That revelation comes later, if you have the courage to continue, if you can transform your burden of consciousness into a gift of vision, if you can learn to serve life with your clear-sightedness rather than using it as a weapon against life. This is the journey Dostoevsky mapped in all his greatest works, the journey from innocence through suffering to a wisdom that includes both truth and love, both clarity and compassion, both knowledge and mystery. You cannot go back to sleep, and thank God for that, because sleep is not what you need. What you need is to learn how to be fully awake in a world of sleepers without losing your humanity in the process, how to see clearly without becoming blind to beauty, how to know the worst without forgetting the possibility of the best. This is the work ahead of you, the real transformation that your awakening has made possible. The truth has broken you open. Now the question is, what will grow in that broken place? Whether you will let it become a garden or a graveyard, whether your awakened consciousness will bloom into wisdom or wither into bitterness. If you recognize yourself in these words, if you know the loneliness of being unable to return to comfortable sleep, then share in the comments what truth you cannot unsee, what awakening has separated you from the consensus reality. Your words might reach someone else walking this same dark path, might offer them the recognition that they are not alone, that what they are experiencing is not madness, but transformation, difficult and painful, but ultimately necessary. Subscribe for more explorations of these territories that Dostoevsky mapped so carefully, these regions of consciousness where most people never venture, but where the most important human experiences unfold. And if you want to understand more about how to live with truth without being destroyed by it, watch my reflection on Dostoevsky's understanding of suffering as the doorway to authentic life, where I explore how the darkness you cannot escape might be exactly what your soul needs to finally become itself. Thank you for having the courage to stay awake. The world needs your open eyes, even when they see things others prefer to ignore, especially then.